Well, I think there's this ongoing debate as to why crude prices are not higher, right? Because the military situation in the Gulf is developing in a way that's not great, and obviously the main focus of that is Saudi Arabia. Looks like we've got some peace in the UAE. We've got a settled situation in Lebanon, and then of course you've got an absolute beating that the Ukrainians are handing out to the Russian oil infrastructure. So I think the answer to the question is refining capacity limitations, and so there's not the ability to use more crude to bring down product prices. And you've got to remember that wholesale gasoline is right now $140 a barrel. So I think people are looking at the wrong oil price, in fact.
Okay, this is critical.
Tom's been calling that out all week.
I've been featuring this Yang Chengchen in China. Off the desk in Singapore, our oil people, they only go to Oxford and Cambridge and LSE. And so he comes up with the ICE Brent distillate refinery. Explain to our audience why looking at the Wawa at $4.20 isn't the way to look at this. You got to look at ICE gas oil in Europe.
No, I slightly disagree. I mean, I think 420 at the Wawa is $160, $70 a barrel, right? So when you think about it in those terms, and then, Brent at 90, we've got a $70 refining margin. And I say that's a margin, that's not a price. So, we've had Valero, for example, printing $12 this morning in their results. I think a year ago they made 1 or 2. So there's, it's just a question of how people look at it, and they just focus on crude oil. But when you think about what happened in Hormuz, you shut down 6 million barrels a day of refining capacity. That's demand for crude. And China, of course, shut down 6 million barrels a day of crude oil imports. So there's been quite a big pressure when you combine it with the SPR and the emergency releases, all crude oil, and then you see this enormous price that we're paying. For example, jet fuel hasn't been far off $200 a barrel. What's fascinating as well, Tom, is people are still flying and driving, so there's been a really interesting thing there. And another thing I'd highlight is the long-term thematic is the separation of the North American oil market from the global, basically because you can't buy Chinese EVs in North America. You've taken away the EV subsidy in North America. So what's happening, a Tesla can't give away a Tesla. So what you're seeing here is actually a situation where we're looking like we'll remain a very oil-dependent economy. The rest of the world will actually do everything they can post-Hormuz to get off oil, even more than they already were.
Can Hormuz ever go back to the way it was pre-war here?
Absolutely not. No, I mean, it's done. It's a one and done. And you've seen that with the Houthis in the Suez. That's 3 years now we've been at 50% of previous volumes. It's just too much risk. And the one thing about the Hormuz, is it's the one incontrovertible, if that's the right word, choke point. So every other choke point globally, there's an alternate. With Hormuz, essentially, it's pipelines. But for LNG, for example, Qatari liquid natural gas, I don't see a solution other than the Hormuz. So they're going to have to make some sort of agreement with the Iranians. The other thing people miss is if you look at where the U.S. Navy is, it's not in the Strait of Hormuz. Those aircraft carriers are way out in the Arabian Sea, which is actually limiting, our ability to bomb, which achieves basically nothing in my view. So it remains a horrendous mess. The other thing I'd highlight is two things. One is Ukraine had a drone attack on Siberian refinery the other day. That's 1,800 kilometers, actually miles, I think. It's a long way. And the other mystery at the moment is that a US-owned gas floating storage vessel in Egypt was blown up by a drone with no one claiming responsibility for that. But that was another thing that was a very strange outcome. Bottom line is the drone, the emergence of drones, the emergence of Ukraine as a global superpower in drones makes all of this refining and tanker infrastructure incredibly vulnerable in a way that it wasn't previously. And the need for domestic energy, which the US has in abundance, domestic infrastructure heavily defended, is going to become a very, very important thing, more than it was previously. And in that regard, the Americas look in very good shape.
What does Iran want, do you think, from an energy perspective? In theory, I think that economically they would want the Strait open to move their oil and their products. Is there a way to negotiate with them to really, just from an economic standpoint, say, let's just open this up because it's good for everybody, including you guys?
I mean, I think where I would say, is this a Suez moment for the US that, like the UK, you just have to exit? The reason I would suggest it's the right thing to do is because at a given level, this is religious. Iran and the Iranian proxies are all Shia. And Iran against Israel is like, are you going to really solve a religious war that goes back, possibly, in the case of the Shias, 1,000 years, but, generally longer. And what are we doing in that theater when we've got our own oil and gas is an open question. What's really interesting here is it seems like the UAE has made peace with Iran. You'll notice there's no attacks right now going on in the UAE. And of course, Dubai historically was a Persian trading post. So there's a very close relationship there. What's not good is that you're now getting the US bombing Iraq, which is where the Shias are attacking the Saudis.
Right.
And it's clear that the Saudis have a major issue here that they have to resolve, having not really had great relations historically with Iran in the way that UAE or Qatar has.
I want to close the loop on this. We're going to have to go here, Paul Sankey. We got to get you back shortly here. There's so much going on. You mentioned, and for a lot of people, this is ancient history. For you and me, it's not. 1956, Sir Anthony Eden blew up his career over Suez. Folks, we're not going to make this a history lesson. All you got to know is the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom went down in flames.
Yeah.
How does President Trump extricate himself from the Sankey complexities you just gave us?
Well, I think they have actually in real terms because the U.S. Navy is out of the Gulf. And we, for example, the base in Bahrain is a skeleton crew. We're actually being forced by military pressure. So I'm not believing a whole lot of what I'm hearing, frankly, from the U.S. administration about what's happening in that theater.
Okay,
I think it's going very poorly. So at a given level, you need to make an agreement with the GCC, with the Saudis and the UAE. Is look, we're out of here. We're out of here.
Agreed. We got to go.
Out.
This is like World War I. It's like T.E. Lawrence coming over and looking at the Suez Canal. We have to make an agreement from the Trucial States up to Kuwait and indeed even Iraq to extricate ourselves.
And what I always said, Tom, right at the beginning is Trump has to immediately fly and see Xi and talk to him and sort this out. That's the only way you can sort it out is with Xi. Trump delayed the visit to Xi and didn't agree a whole lot. And then days later, Xi met Putin, as you know. Now, Xi again is the only guy that's out if you want to do it with, another superpower. But you're going to have to concede an awful lot to China.